All right, this is the PowerPoints for chapter number 1, an invitation to biology. And it's going to seem like that we are just covering a lot of information, and we are. We're just giving an overview of basically most of biology in this first chapter, just giving you the very broad strokes, basics of biology, and we're going to be in future chapters focusing in on these issues. But of course, biology is the study of life. Bio means life, ology means study, so it's the study of life. And biology is constantly changing. We're discovering new species, especially in the rainforest, all the time. And unfortunately, as this PowerPoint shows, that we're losing a lot of species each and every year. What biology tries to do is to study life, define life, and then organize and characterize. So life is more than the sum of its parts. Scientists love to organize things, to put them in the different levels. Nature's organization begins at the level of atoms and extends all the way through the biosphere. And the quality of life emerges at the level of the cell. A question that's going to be on the first test is, what is the smallest unit of life? And that's the cell. So this chart just represents, the minerals, the compounds that's out there, and when it's arranged in different ways, they form different things. But you'll see, it's only when they're arranged with stuff added on to it. So we are made from common minerals, water, elements that come together, and there is an emergent process, and phosphorus and these things together, and for life to emerge. Science has not explained how that happens, but we are made of the same things, of the things of this earth. So nature is everything in the universe except for what humans have manufactured. That's an excellent test question, I think. So on the test, let me tell you something about the test. The tests are all multiple choice. And so if this was a question on the test, it would say blank is everything in the universe except what humans have manufactured. And so out of a list of 6 different options, you will pick nature. But that just makes sense, right? Nature is what occurs naturally, not the things that are man-made. Rocks, plants, trees, animal, clouds, all of that occurs naturally. Automobiles, in plastic, things like that don't occur naturally. That is manufactured. So, starting off at the very basic building blocks. Atoms. That's the fundamental building blocks of everything. We move from atoms to molecules. A molecule is 2 or more atoms that are bonded together, and we're going to be covering chemical bonding in the next chapter. But the molecules of life, what are the molecules of life? Lipids, fats, proteins. Proteins, we're going to discover as we go through biology, proteins are all important. Your DNA, which is the blueprint on how to make you, it only codes for one thing: proteins. Proteins is going to determine how your body functions, what you look like, all the things that make you, is going to come from proteins. RNA, which is the messenger. DNA is, the blueprint of our bodies, and complex carbohydrates. Starches, simple carbohydrates, sugar. We're going to discover that sugars are all important in biology. And the cell is the smallest unit with the emergent property of life. Again, what is the smallest unit of life? On the test, make sure you remember the cell is the smallest unit of life. So atoms, the fundamental building blocks. Molecules, more than one atom joined together. We have the cell, the smallest unit of life. Some, like this plant cell, live and reproduce as part of multicellular organisms. It's a little bit over 34 trillion cells. So some organisms live with just one cell. They can either make their own food or go out and hunt their food, digest their food, and break down the food into the sugars that they need for energy. And that they can go about their whole life cycle with one cell. You have 34 trillion. Now, how is 34 trillion cells coming together to make the one you? That's something that we haven't answered yet either. Nobody knows for sure how that happens. But the cell is the smallest unit of life. Then we can go up to the organisms. As I said, it can be one cell, or it can be many cells. In many cell organisms, typically you will find tissues. Tissues is a group of cells that have organized together to carry out a particular function. You have some tissue systems in your body. The easiest one to identify is this stuff right here. This is your epithelial tissues. This is your protective layer that keeps all that bacteria and viruses on the outside from invading your body. Now with this COVID-19, what are we talking about? How are you catching this? How are people getting it? It's usually through the nostril or through the eyes or in the mouth. It's usually hand to face. So you touch something that has the virus on it, you come rub your eye, your nose, your mouth, and suddenly you have introduced this inside of you. The tissues, so that your epithelial tissues give you protection from stuff on the outside. An organ is a group of tissues that carry out a task or a particular set of tasks. Your eyes are organs that are there so that you can absorb wavelengths of light, transmit that to an electrical impulse that goes to the brain that decodes that into an image that you can see. Your heart is an organ. As it beats, it is pumping blood throughout your body so that it pumps blood from your heart to your lungs to pick up oxygen, comes back to the heart, pumps it back out again to the rest of your body to deliver oxygen. Now, why is oxygen so important? We're going to discover here as we go through this class, sugar. You have to have oxygen to break down sugars. So an organ. An organ system is a set of interacting organs. We're going to be talking about things like the digestive system, which starts at the esophagus and goes to the stomach, and then into the small intestines, and then you have your pancreas that is releasing enzymes to help your digestion continue in the small intestines, and your liver is producing bile which goes to the gallbladder and then pumps out into the small intestine so that you can break down lipids, fats. And so this is a group of interacting organs that carry out a particular function. And so as we go through our flower example here, here's a tissue of the plant that looks like the plant petal. Here is the flower. This is an organ. This is the reproductive organ of the plant. You can see this little thing right here in the middle. That is the female reproductive organ. And these little things that go around through here, that is the male reproductive organ. But that is an organ in the plant. Here is an organ system which has the reproductive organ along with the shoots and the roots down below, branches, auxiliary buds, and all those things we're going to be learning about this semester. Then, once you get past that, we go into a population. This is some excellent questions here. What is a population? It's a group of interbreeding individuals of the same species in the same area. So in the campus right now of Bluefield State, where I'm standing, we are on shutdown still here, except for essential employees. So the populations of humans on this campus right now is probably only about 20. And all the buildings here on this campus. When semester is up and running and thriving, we can have well over 1,000 here at one time. So it is the number of the same species in a given area. What is the community? It's all the populations of all the species in this area. So on the campus of Bluefield State, we got about 20 humans. But outside the window here, I can see that we have oak trees on the front of the science building. And so we have a population of oak trees. We have a population of maple trees. We have a population of redbud trees. We have populations of grass growing. We have little wildflowers growing. And so all these populations put together creates the community. So the community right now at Bluefield State is the humans and every other species of living organisms. The ecosystem is, we're broadening out even a little bit further than that. The ecosystem is the community with all the species, but we're going to add to the ecosystem the environmental factors such as wind, rain, water is critical for life to have input of water, sunlight that comes down. We're going to learn that sunlight is critical. So that is the ecosystem, so it's the living things plus the environment. And we go to the biosphere, which is all regions of the earth where organisms live. And so here is a multicelled organism. This is one bush that has many flowers on it. But then when you look, here's the population in a given area. This is California poppy plants in the Antelope Valley. So in that valley, the population, you can go to and count and know the exact number of population. We'll talk about that as we get to the end of the semester, how we determine population densities and diversity. And then the community is not just the poppies, but it's all the other plants, plus the insects, the animals, everything that is living there. The ecosystem, here is the valley. You can see the yellow of the flowers down here, but it also includes the streams going through, the wind as it comes, the sunlight that comes through. The biosphere is our Earth. As of right now, the only place that we know that life exists is on the planet Earth. We're going to be talking about a little bit later that our universe is really, really big. There's so many stars now that it is just, it has shocked scientists at what the Hubble telescope has done to our universe. It is so much larger, and there's so much more there. They're now saying that there's more stars in our universe than there are grains of sand on this planet. There's over 70 sextillion stars in our universe, which is amazing. But right now, because we can't leave our little solar system, right now the planet Earth is the only place where we have discovered life. So there's an atom. Here's DNA. This is the blueprint. This is the molecule of life. We'll talk about that more. This is an animal cell, and we're going to go through all the different parts of the animal cell as we go through for this first test. There is a tissue, connective tissue. There's an organ. There's an eye of a fish. There's a tissue system. This is the epidermal tissue of the fish, the scales that go on the outside of the fish. And so atom, molecule, cell, tissue, organ system, and there is our organism. There is the fish. And here is a population. Here is the community of all the different populations in an area. Here is our ecosystem. This is, well, that's Saudi Arabia, isn't it? So this is the ecosystem, which includes the water, the topography, the sunlight, everything else, and here is our biosphere. So multicelled organisms, population, community, ecosystem, and the biosphere. Now, how are living things alive? Well, all living things that we know of so far have certain things in common. They require constant inputs of energy and raw materials. Think about this for yourself. Your heart has to keep beating every minute for blood to keep flowing, to deliver oxygen throughout your body so that you can continue to break down sugars. Then that blood goes through the small intestines, to the villi there, and it picks out the sugars and the nutrients and everything that your body needs, and it flows through your body and dumps it off there. But you need, every time your heartbeat requires energy. Every time you move a muscle, it requires energy. When you breathe in, that requires energy. So you need a constant input of energy. We're going to be spending the whole second test on how we get energy onto this planet. So everything requires energy. Everything that is alive can sense and respond to change. That's critical for life to be able to survive, is to respond to change. And something else that all living things have in common, they have DNA to pass to their offspring. The building block of life, the blueprints of life, the DNA, Everything alive is composed of cells which contain DNA for that cell to be able to reproduce, to function, to mend itself, to do all the things that the metabolism of a cell requires. So energy, this is something that we're going to be learning now. We're going to keep learning this all semester long. And so get this concept now, and it's going to serve you well through the rest of this summer term. Energy flows one way. Think about this before we go any further. What gives you the energy for your heart to beat? What gives you the energy to move, to get up out of bed, to be able to walk, and to be able to do all the things that you do? What is the primary source of all the energy that you use? Now, don't answer that too quick. I wish you were here that we could have a discussion about this. The primary source for all energy, not just for you, but for all living things on this planet, is the sun. The sun is emitting this energy through light, and it passes through, but it cannot be recycled. Energy flows one way through the ecosystem. Nutrients we can recycle, energy we cannot. So energy goes one way. But every time energy is transferred, some of that energy escapes as heat. So when you eat, you are eating because what is it? Where are you getting all your energy from? It's coming from the sun. What happens is plants absorb that sunlight, convert that sunlight into sugar. Then they have sugar that the plant can use to keep building, to making cells, to doing all the things that the plant needs to do. Excess sugar is stored as a carbohydrate starch, and then we eat that, and that is where we are getting our energy. But when we eat that energy and our body breaks apart the energy, the sugar to get the energy that we need, we're going to be losing a lot of that energy as heat. That's why we are warm. What is the temperature inside of our bodies? It's 98.6 degrees. That's a lot warmer than the outside temperature. Why is our bodies warmer? Well, a couple things is when we break down sugars, it releases heat. We're losing that. But it's critical for our body temperatures to be warmer because guess what is the best temperature for your enzymes in your body to break apart sugar so you can live? It is 98.6. And so that's why your body is fighting to keep that. But you're going to lose a lot of that as heat. So if we had an infrared camera and we could shine it on you, your body would appear to be bright red, most of it, because you are radiating heat. So you're taking energy in through eating sugars and carbohydrates, but you're losing a lot of that as heat. And then nutrients, substance that an organism must have for growth and survival, but we cannot make it ourselves. There's a lot of nutrients that we need in our diet. And so, if y'all remember the Lion King, remember Mufasa was talking to Simba, talking about the circle of life, right? Remember that? And so, remember what he said, the antelope eats the grass, the lion eats the antelope, the lion falls over and dies eventually. His body decays and goes back into the ground, which makes new grass. What he's talking about there is the nutrients. So yeah, we do recycle the nutrients. The nutrients keep recycling. Energy only flows one way, and then it is lost. All right. How living things can be classified. Here's two terms. Know these two terms because these two terms are going to keep popping up again and again and again. Just about every single test that we're going to have this semester, these terms will be on that test. What are the producers? The producers acquire energy and raw materials from the environment. They make their own food. So plants, through the process of photosynthesis, photo means light, synthesis means to build. They use light to build sugars. They use light to build their own energy. And so they are the producers. They produce their own energy. They don't need to eat because they can convert sunlight into the energy that they need. Everything else that is not a producer is called a consumer. They can't make their own food. They get energy by feeding on other organisms. So animals, that's us. We can't go out into the sunlight and spread our arms out and absorb the sun and convert that into sugar. We can't do that. Only the plants can do that. Bacteria can do that. But, so we are classified as consumers. So know those two terms. Producers make their own food. Consumers have to get it from somewhere else. They have to get the constant inflow of energy from somewhere else. That's why you have to eat every day, because you need that constant input of energy. Now, when you don't eat during the day, what's happening? You're storing energy as fat, and then you start to break that down. So we'll talk more about that as we go through this class. And here's a simple little chart that tells energy is flowing through the system. The producers absorb the sunlight energy and make sugar out of it. Consumers, we are getting our energy by feeding on the plants, and the nutrients that is required in our bodies are recycled. So we get that from the things we eat too. So the nutrients are recycled throughout the system. The sunlight passes through and cannot be recycled. Energy cannot be recycled. So all energy that enters the world of life eventually flows out of it, mainly as heat released back to the environment. Seems like a lot of waste, but it has to be that way for us to keep our internal body temperatures warm. So here is producers and consumers. Here is our producers here, the plant. And you'll see the caterpillars are consumers by eating the producers. Since they can't use sunlight to make their own sugars, they are getting it from the carbohydrate starch in the plants. I like this. This is an old system. I love this one because it shows us the numbers. The producers are on the bottom. There's a lot more producers than there are anything else. The next largest group is the primary consumers, the things that directly eat the producers, the plants. So we have insects, animals, birds that do that. Secondary consumers eat the primary consumers. So primary consumers are classified as herbivores. They eat only plants. Secondary consumers eat the primary consumers, but you notice there's a smaller number of those, so it gets smaller and smaller. So you get to the top, those are the tertiary consumers. That's the top of the food chain, as we say, and so that they eat both the secondary consumers and the primary consumers. But you'll notice here that heat is lost in the living system. You see that there's not humans on here. Where do we belong in this? Well, we are called omnivores. We eat everything. And trust me, we eat everything. So we eat producers, that's your vegetables, fruit that we eat, and then we can also eat the primary, secondary, tertiary. So we feed from every level of this system. Another way that living things, we talk about, they require energy. They also respond to change. We have receptors. It's a molecule or cellular structure that responds to a specific form of stimulation. So right now in your body, you have these receptors that are measuring the sugar in your blood. Remember, sugar is all important. So if there's too much sugar, you release insulin to get it and to store it away as fat, typically. If there's not enough, glucagon is released from the same pancreas to go to the fat and break off the sugars again. So you've got receptors that's constantly monitoring your sugar levels. You've got receptors monitoring your oxygen levels. You have receptors monitoring your temperature inside. And so you've got all these things working together. The pH of your blood, you've got receptors monitoring that constantly. Everything alive is going to respond to change. So what is homeostasis? This is an important term. Homeo means the same. Stasis means standing. Everything alive is going to try to fight for homeostasis, to have the same standing. So your body is going to fight to keep your blood oxygen at a certain level, your blood sugar at a certain level, your body temperature at a certain level. All these things are going to stay the same. That's why when you get sick, your temperature can go up or down and things aren't normal, and your body struggles with that. And so homeostasis is a great thing. You want to keep everything at precise levels that is best for life to continue. Here is an orangutan, baby orangutan, responding to stimulus. Actually, this person was tickling him, and the orangutan was laughing. So, yeah, living things respond to stimulus. Organisms use DNA. So remember, constant input of energy, respond to change, and then everything alive has DNA. DNA is the basis of similarities in form and function of organisms. It is the oxyribonucleic acid. It carries all the hereditary information. It codes only for proteins, but those proteins are going to determine who you are and how your body functions. So all of that is passed along from parents. There's one of the basis of the cell theory was a formula by Louis Pasteur called biogenesis, which means all life comes from pre-existing life. Now, what does that mean? It means that everything alive on this planet had parents. So it's not, maybe you were told as a kid that, they found you underneath the cabbage patch or the store brought you that, you just came. No, when you see something alive, it came from parents. Bacteria, the binary fission, a mother cell will split into two daughter cells. Those two daughter cells came from the DNA of a parent. For animals and plants, it is half of the DNA from mom, half of the DNA from dad, and chromosomes. Those chromosomes line up, battle it out to determine what you're going to be. So DNA is critical. DNA guides metabolic activities. It makes all the proteins, the enzymes, the hormones, and everything that controls our metabolism, but also our development. Multi-step process where the first cell of a new individual becomes a multi-cell adult. So and you may not want to think about this, but when you were brought into existence, the egg from mom, the sperm from dad get together and form one cell. That one cell divides, and now there's two, but those two cells are identical. Then they divide again into 4, then again into 8, then again into 16, then again into 32, then again into 64, then again into 128, and then once we get there, my math's not good enough to keep going. But once we get to just a little bit above that, these cells, the DNA, are going to start to wake up and say, okay, we're building a baby here. This baby is going to need a brain for the baby to live and to function. So one of the cells says, okay, I'm going to start dividing to form nervous tissue. Another cell says, you know what, this baby's going to need a heart. So it starts to divide to form that heart and the nervous system. And so all the different things differentiate as it develops. And that is controlled by DNA. The different parts of your DNA, if you take your DNA and stretch it out, it would be 8 feet long, but that is a coding system on how to make proteins that is going to make you. And in growth in multi-celled species, an increase in the number, size, and volume of the cells. So, and the adult, as we said, we have about over 34 trillion cells, which is an amazing thing to think about. Also, we're going to talk about, from DNA, we get reproduction. The process of individuals produce an offspring. So we pass along the DNA through reproduction, and inheritance is the transmission of DNA to the offspring. So we inherit traits based on our parents. Let me show you a stupid one. If you can bend your thumb backwards like that, that's called hitchhiker's thumb. That is a recessive trait. So I know, my mom can bend her thumb backwards, and so she has that as a recessive trait, so I know that both her chromosomes that she got from her mom and her dad had that recessive trait. My dad cannot bend his thumb backwards, but I can. And so I know that he has a dominant of this and a recessive. It just so happened that the sperm that formed me was the one that carried the recessive gene, and so now I can do this. And so these are traits that we inherit. Eye color, hair color, height, just all these different things that we inherit. And in this time of pandemic, we are learning that some people have inherited a greater immune system for viruses. Some people just don't catch the flu. I have only caught the flu once in my life. I never take a flu shot. And so there is a genetic component of traits that even help you battle some of these things. All right, so how do living things differ? That's how they're all the same. They need constant inputs of energy. They respond to change and adapt, and they have DNA. Well, how do they differ? There's different characteristics. This is what scientists love to do. They love to start classifying things according to the characteristics. Various classification schemes help us to organize this variation, which we call the Earth biodiversity. What is biodiversity? I mean, this would be a pretty good question. It's the scope of variation among living organisms. All right, so organisms can be classified into broad groups depending on whether they have a nucleus. Now, first of all, before we start talking about that, we're going to learn more about the nucleus in a couple more chapters. But the nucleus is what holds the DNA. So does a cell have a nucleus that has an envelope around it, or does it not? So the nucleus is a sac of two membranes that encloses and protects the cell's DNA. Some organisms on this planet do not have a set nucleus. They have DNA, but it is not membrane bound. So bacteria and the archaeans are two types of organisms where the DNA is not contained within a nucleus. Bacteria, the most diverse and well-known group of single-celled organisms that lack a nucleus. Bacteria are everywhere, on every surface. They are, there's trillions of them in your intestines that help you digest food. There's good bacteria. Archaeans, these were not discovered until the late 70s, early 80s, as we started to understand what they were. When I was in college, it was just bacteria. It was the only thing about nuclei. And we called them eukaryotes and prokaryotes. We'll get to that. But the Archaeans was discovered. They do not have a nucleus, but they're more closely related to the organisms that have a nucleus than the bacteria. So here's some different examples of bacteria. You don't need to know anything about that. Actually, this is a cyanobacteria. That's a losing analogy. Here's the Archaeans. We'll learn more about them in a later chapter 2. Single-celled, no nucleus, and they can live in the most extreme environments. This is a heat-loving one. This little guy can live in volcanic vents in the ocean. All right, so there are 3 domains. As we look at life, we have bacteria and archaea, which do not have a nucleus, and everything else that has a nucleus is called eukarya. Eu means true. Karya means seed. So the eukaryotes are those that have a true seed or that nucleus. This is what they called the nucleus in the early days. These guys down here are classified as prokaryotes, which means before the seed. And so they do not have a membrane-bound nucleus. So eukaryotes, the DNA is contained within a nucleus. Some eukaryotes live as individual cells, but most are multi-celled. Eukaryotic cells are typically larger and more complex than bacteria or eukaryotic. Eukaryotic cells have a lot more organelles, which we will be discussing as we go through this. And so here's some different classifications. Protists, I don't like to cover protists first because protists, what is a protist? This is a kingdom. Protist is everything that has a nucleus that is not a plant, an animal, or a fungi. So they're just dumped into this category. This is the only category in science that is defined by what it's not. It has a nucleus, so it is a eukaryote, but it's not a plant, it's not an animal, it's not a fungi. So they vary a great deal, from single-cell consumers to the giant multi-cell producers. The giant kelp in the ocean, which is over 100 feet long, is a protist. But the single-cell paramecium that is in every drop of water is also a protist, so extremely different. Many biologists, and that would be me, view protists as several different major groups. I don't like this kingdom protist because, there's things that look just like plants in there, and there's things that behave as animals in there. So I think they should be split up even further. But here's Protus. There's the giant kelp. This is an amoeba. That's a foraminiferium. This is a slime mold. This is a sexually transmitted disease, pros. We will talk about that one later. What are fungi? Here's a definition of fungi. You need to know this. What are the fungi? Well, they are multi-celled eukaryotic cells, eukaryotes, such as mushrooms. They are mostly decomposers. But here's what makes them fungi. They secrete substances that break down food outside of the body, and then they absorb what is digested. So we are not fungi. Why? Because our digestive system is inside. If you were a fungus, this would be gross. If you were a fungi, they set a plate in front of you, you would just spit out all these enzymes on it, let it break it all down, put your hand on it, and then absorb it up through your body. And that would be how a fungi gets its energy. So it is external digestion. If there's one thing you need to remember about fungi, external digestion. They are eukaryotes. They can't make their own food. They have to get it elsewhere. They're consumers. Actually, they're classified as decomposers. They break down dead things, but they have to get it from outside, so they are a consumer. But they digest externally and then absorb it in. So here's some examples of some different types of mushrooms. And then the plants are multicelled eukaryotes that live on land or in freshwater environments. Most plants, 99% of the plants, are photosynthetic producers. Remember, they turn sunlight into sugar. Plants and other photosynthesizers also serve as foods for most of the other organisms in the biosphere. This is the foundation of the food web, which we'll talk about later in the semester. But plants capture the energy for all living things on this earth. If it wasn't for the plants, we wouldn't be here. Because we can't capture energy to make sugar. Only the plants can. And so we don't eat that much plants. Well, about half of our diet is typically plants, or over half. But we get our sugars from eating the plants, eating the primary consumers, secondary consumers, tertiary consumers. So we're getting our energy. So plants can be everything from the giant sequoias out in California to the ranunculus here, which is just a daisy. And then animals. This is our group, right? Multi-cell consumers that ingest tissues or juices from other organisms. Herbivores graze. Carnivores eat. Graze means they eat the producer. So herbivores only eat plants. Carnivores only eat meat. Scavengers eat the remains of other organisms, like buzzards, vultures, crows can eat that. Parasites draw nutrients from the tissues of the host. When we get into the section about viruses, viruses act like parasites. They're not parasites, but they act similar. Animals develop through stages that lead to an adult form. And here's one of the most defining characteristics of what makes us an animal. They actively move about during at least part of their lives. So we can't make our own food. We don't have roots and shoots, so we're not plants. But we actively move, at least in some part of our life cycle. Won't get into any jokes about couch potatoes not moving around. Everybody moves around. So here is a fox eating a squirrel. So that is, actually he's got 2 squirrels in his mouth there. An aphid this is an animal. Believe it or not, insects are animals. You don't think about them as animals, but they're in the animal kingdom. Here is a mouse eating a beetle. And here's the human eating a cheeseburger. For some reason, humans and cheeseburgers always go together in your book. I haven't figured out why yet, but cheeseburgers and humans always go together. All right, so an overview of life diversity. There's been estimated over 100 billion different kinds of organisms that have ever lived on Earth. And as many as 100 million are still with us today, which is an amazing thing to think about. There's so much diversity. We are discovering stuff all the time, especially in the bacteria. We are discovering bacteria in course, we're not including viruses in this, and the virus is the topic right now. Believe it or not, viruses are not alive. They are not a living. They don't have any of those three characteristics that we talked about that all living things share. We'll talk about viruses a little bit later. All right. So we want to organize. And so each type of organism or species is given a unique name. So we're given a species name, a genus name, and a species name. What is the genus for humans? Our genus is Homo. What is our species name? We are sapiens, so that makes us human beings. So we defined and grouped species based on shared traits. And basically, in the animal kingdom, the species is they can interbreed. So two of them can get together and make young, and so that makes them the same species. In plants, it can be just a little bit fuzzy at times on that. Taxonomy is the science of naming and classifying species. So we have the binomial system, and know this on the test. Know this guy, Carolus Linnaeus. He gave us the Linnaean system, which is this two-part naming system. The first part is the genus, the group of species that share a unique set of features, and then the second part is the species, the specific epithet. As I said, we are Homo sapiens. I have two dogs at the house. Both of them are Canis terminularis. Now they have different varieties of that species. I have a husky and a border collie, but they are both Canis terminularis. And so genus and species. The tree out here is Quercus. That is its genus name. Alba, it is a white pine. A white oak. And so everything has that two-part naming system. The dog rose is Rosa canina, the canines. And so it's named for the common name dog rose, so it gives it that specific epithet. Here is a heavy-beaked parrotfish, which is Scarus gibbus. And so Scarus is the genus. The genus name is always capitalized. And you'll notice that it is italicized. The genus and species name either has to be italicized or underlined. So if you are writing it out, you underline the genus and species. All right, so we rank species into ever more inclusive categories: genus, family, order, class, phylum, kingdom, domain. Back when I was in high school, we learned this basic system about domain. King Philip came over from Germany Saturday, put the species in there. So that's just a silly way to remember. King Philip came over from Germany Saturday. So king, kingdom, B, phylum, class, order, family, genus. Every rank or taxon is a group of organisms that share a unique set of features. Each higher taxon possesses a group of the next lower. So this is what's in your book. Again, this book, when you get your book, you can get it ebook, you can get it, rent a copy of it. This is the 15th edition. I meant to tell you this earlier. If you can get the 14th edition cheaper, go ahead and get the 14th edition, because they're basically the same. They just changed some pictures in it. Actually, the PowerPoints I'm using, most of those is from the 14th edition. So 14th edition, if you can get it cheaper, get that. The information's the same. It's just they changed some pictures. But your book also does this for some reason. You're a college student. So look at what they always throw in. And I don't know if y'all see this down here. You got a copy of these PowerPoints. They put marijuana in this group. They think that's going to pique your interest for some reason. But you'll see, here's the domain. They're all eukaryotes. They all have a nucleus. They're all in the same kingdom. They're all plants, so plantae. And notice they're all in the same phylum. They're all in the same class. But now, once you get down to order, we're going to start to get a little bit of difference. And then family. So as you get to little individual traits and characteristics that separate them out even more, you get these lower taxons, all the way down to the species. So down here is the species name at the bottom. So there's our dog rose over there at the end. The prickly rose is the apple. Malus is the genus name of the apple. Here's marijuana, cannabis, sativa, and here is Docus, which is the wild carrot. All right, so 3 domains: bacteria, archaeans, and eukaryotes. So this is just comparing those 3 domains again. We've already covered all this. This is just a good study tool for you to keep these separate. And here's the way that, if once we get out of the domain, going to the kingdoms, we have 6 kingdoms: bacteria, archaea, protists, plants, fungi, and animals. In our class, we're going to be covering this, and this. Second semester biology will be focused entirely on the animals. All right. A species is assigned to a higher taxa based on heritable trait it shares with others. Morphological traits you can observe. Physiological traits, functional characteristics, and behavioral traits, responses to certain stimuli. So as we talk about life, like for bacteria, it's how they respond to certain stimuli is going to determine the species of that bacteria much more than what they look like. Bacteria groupings will look very much the same, but how they respond to heat or different things determines the species. Traits vary little within a species. There can be a tremendous difference between species. Such species are very different, so it's easy to tell them apart. It's not hard to tell us apart from a housewife. We're in the animal kingdom together, but as you move away, to observable traits, you're going to be characterized different. Species that share a more recent ancestor may be harder to tell apart. All right. Ernst Mayr defined a species. Remember, we talked about what a species is that they can breed together. If they can produce fertile offspring, and they don't interbreed within other groups, that is a different species. Now, let's say you have a horse that mates with a different species, a donkey. It can have a baby. You don't know what the baby is called. It's called a mule. But the mule is infertile. It cannot have babies of its own. So these are 2 separate species. They can't get together to form fertile species. So the mule is not its own little different species. The biological species concept is useful in many cases, but it's not universally applicable. In bacteria, it just doesn't come into play much. In plants, we're going to talk about, we're going to see some differences of how plants reproduce. Protists, a lot of difference in protists. For now, though, it's important to remember that a species is a convenient but artificial human construction. All these different classifications are artificial constructions. Here's 4 butterflies, 2 species. Now you look at this and you think, well, okay, here's one species here, they look the same. Here's one species over here. No, these 2 are one species, these 2 are another species. This is this is the female, this is the male. It just so happens that this species has mimicked this one, because this coloration here tells predators, man, this butterfly tastes horrific. Don't even touch this butterfly. This butterfly doesn't taste bad, but it determined that if it can mimic the colors of the ones up here, then predators won't eat it. And so they are 2 different species. This cannot mate with this to make fertile offspring. That's why we know there's 2 species. All right. The theory of evolution by natural selection is an explanation of life's diversity. Darwin was completely right when he said natural selection, the strongest genes survive. And so we pass down our genes to our young. I told you I have a little different worldview. I don't agree with everything Darwin said, but man, he nailed this. Natural selection determines what genes are passed on and what ones are not. All right. Encoded information in DNA is the basis of traits, and we've already talked about that. Mutations are the original source of variation in traits. Is that completely true? Geneticists have discovered that mutations never add information, they only scramble current information. And sometimes that's very good. I don't know if you've been listening to the news a lot. COVID-19, this novel virus, has already started to mutate. And for us, usually that's good when viruses mutate. They mutate down in severity of the condition, because believe it or not, viruses do not want to kill their host. The host keeps making them so they can be spread out. If they kill the host, then it's not good. So they will mutate, and they mutate quickly. That's why every year we have a new flu vaccine, because mutations come and form new viruses with new, unfortunately, this one was a new one to humans, and it came from a bat to a human. Wasn't supposed to, but it did, and so now we're dealing with this. Adaptations. Some forms of trait are more adaptive than others, so their bearers are more likely to survive and reproduce. I'll give you just a quick example. I know this lecture you get long. This is a long chapter. I love wolves. I studied wolves in my graduate studies at Marshall University. When the wolves were in the plains, they were short hair, because it's very hot out in the plains typically, and they were long legged. The longer the leg, the more the blood can cool as it is being pumped around. But when man started hunting the wolves, we drove them north up into Montana, South Dakota, North Dakota, and then up into Canada, up through Glacier National Park and northwards. What we discovered was that most of the wolves, when they moved north, they would die, because short hair, they couldn't handle the cold, and long legs, their blood got too cold. But there were some wolves that had longer hair, shorter legs, they survived. And then guess what? When they had babies, what traits were passed along? Long fur, short hair. So the fur became longer and longer, because that was the trait that was best for that. That was the strongest gene, and so the wolves up north are much shorter, longer hair. Now, we reintroduced wolves in the Yellowstone, and guess what happened over time with these wolves? The legs start to get longer, the fur starts to get shorter. All that information is in there. All that information is carried in the DNA of every wolf. It's just what's going to be expressed as the traits. And so, yes, animals, plants adapt to their condition. So there are adaptive traits. Skin color is an adaptive trait for different climates or humans. We are all identical. We have exactly the same genes on the same chromosomes. That means that we're all the same. There's no one on this planet better than anybody else. It's just some people have adapted to the climate that they live in and have different skin colors. And so that's just the way these things, science has now proven all that we've all come from the same people, but as we spread out, we adapted to our environments, and it made us look a little different, but we are identical. We are the same species. We can interbreed, and that proves it. All right, evolution is a change in the line of descent. Natural selection is what we were talking about. That's what Darwin nailed. What was the strongest genes for the wolves as they moved northward? Natural selection said it's going to be long fur, short legs. So that's the strongest genes, and so they survived up north. As they came back down, long fur was not great when you're out in the hot plains, and so those typically started to die off, and the other genes started to thrive in that environment. So that's natural selection. When a wolf hunts, what does the wolf hunt? Is he going to, when it comes to a herd of caribou, let's say, is he going to hunt the strongest and fastest caribou? No. The wolves hunt the slowest and the weakest, or the sick, and so the ones that's easiest to catch and to kill. And so they are, by natural selection, removing the bad genes out. I'll give you another story here. Disney made this into a movie called Never Cry Wolf. In Alaska, they noticed that their caribou population started to decline. And so the governor of Alaska, years and years ago, said, okay, I'm going to put a bounty on wolves, because if our caribou are dying, the predator here is the wolf. It's killing all our caribou. We need to get rid of the wolves. And so they put a bounty on the wolves. The wolves were all hunted, but they noticed something. The caribou numbers kept going down and down and down. So they sent this scientist up. His name was Farley Mowat. I can't make up that name. So Farley went up there, and he made a discovery that absolutely shocked science. His discovery was, your problem with the caribou is your number of wolves have gone down, because wolves will hunt and kill those that are carrying weak genes, sick genes, susceptibility to diseases. So the wolves kill all that, so the genes that are left are stronger and healthier for the environment, and so the herd will get stronger and will grow and be more strong. So once Alaska said, okay, we're going to stop killing the wolves, they let the wolves population grow, and guess what? The caribou herd started doing much better and growing and stronger, and the numbers going up. And so that is an example of natural selection. At work, we're seeing it here in West Virginia. Our deer population has absolutely skyrocketed, and because we removed the predators. There's no natural predators here except for us. And so the deer herds are getting sicklier, and you'll notice that they look mangy in some areas. And so that's why we do hunting. We are managing the population. Unfortunately, we're not getting the weakest out. Hunters typically try to get the strongest, the biggest, strongest looking buck out there. So we're not perfect in this, but we do hunt, and we'll talk more about that in the future. So science is critical thinking. We make a hypothesis that is testable explanation for what we see. We test the predictions on a model, maybe experiments or casual observations. We test the results, we form a conclusion, and do the results support the hypothesis or not. We report the results to the scientific community. Let me give you just a quick example here. I used to work bioassays, and so I started off at a lab in Charleston, Technical Testing Laboratories, which is going to CT and environmental. And I got a call one day from the DNR, and he says, is this one of your clients? And I said, yes. And he said, you got to come down here because they have killed everything in this river. So we went down to where the effluent is coming out, and I thought the guy was joking. It killed everything. There was not even bacteria growing in that part of the river. Now, I knew what this client was. They made bo-peat bleach, so that they were putting out too much bleach into the water system. And so what was my hypothesis then? So I had to test this to find out how much do we have to reduce this for life to return to normal. My hypothesis was the greater amount of chlorine in the water, the more lethal it's going to be. So I went back and set up a test. I went to the research and looked and see about where it was at, and this has been tested a lot, but the EPA said, no, you got to test it, so we want to know what it is in that river, in that spot. So I set up 25% bleach, set up 12.5% bleach, put up 6.253, and all the way down, to below 1%. We put water fleas in there. It's a little Seriadapnia, which is a little, it's an insect, it's a crustacean, water fleas. And so put them in there and come and look the next day, and sure enough, everything in 25% was dead. Everything in 12.5% dead. Everything in 6.25% dead. Everything in the 3%, well, now, there was a couple dead in the 3%, most of them alive. Then go down to the 1.5%. Well, just about all of them were alive in the 1.5%. So did my hypothesis stand? The greater the concentration, the more lethal it would be? Yes, it did. And so then I had to go back and reset the test up, starting at about 5%, and then doing another serial dilution all the way down to very low numbers, to get exactly what is the point where it's gonna start to kill organisms in this water. And so then we report that to the EPA. I get together with this company and say, okay, the EPA is gonna start fining you hundreds of thousands of dollars if you keep dumping like that. So what we did was we designed for them a pool where their effluent would go into it before it went out into the river, and we put pumps with fountains in it, because chlorine, as it goes into the air, will dissolve into the air. And so we removed all the chlorine out of their effluent before it spilled out into the river. And so now there was almost 0% death. We helped clean up the river. We helped this client from getting fined. They were happy, the EPA was happy, I was happy, the organisms in the river was happy. And so all of that comes through this scientific method of testing. Forming a hypothesis, setting up an experiment, searching the literature to find out, has this been done before, and then reporting the results. All right, give you just another story here. Good news for you is that you can pause this video and do this in different sections. I was in Cincinnati, Ohio, commercial testing and engineering, and when this test happened, we took a part in this test. The main employer in Cincinnati, Ohio is Procter & Gamble, P&G. And they came up with this thing that was going to be revolutionary. They came up with a fat-free potato chip. They had this thing called Olestra, Olestra. You could fry things in it, but it wouldn't add fat content to it. And so they published it first, or produced it first, as Pringles. So it said no fat Pringles. And so people ate them. They tasted like Pringles, tasted like a regular potato chip. And so everybody was, oh, all right, we finally got a potato chip that's not adding a lot of fat to our diet. Well, then people started complaining. When they ate these, they had stomach cramps, intestinal problems after eating the chips. It got to the point where the FDA said, okay, Procter & Gamble, when you put this out, you have to put on your can of Pringles, warning, this may cause intestinal discomfort or anal leakage. That was actually on the Pringles can. Now, guess what? If you're shopping for Pringles and you look at it and it says may cause anal leakage, you're not going to buy it anymore. So this Olestra, the stock went way up when they first put it out. Now guess what happened? And it cratered, because they thought nobody's going to want to eat this stuff. So what they did was, hypothesis. If Olestra causes cramps, then people who eat Olestra should be more likely to get cramps than people who don't eat it. It makes sense, right? That's an inductive reasoning, So if Olestra is the problem, then people who eat it will have problems. People who don't eat it won't. It just makes sense. So the potato chip experiment continued here. So there was a laboratory, and they picked one. This actually was in laboratories all over the country. This was millions upon millions of dollars of profit for Procter & Gamble that they were building with it. So in this one laboratory, they put 1,100 people asked to watch a movie and to eat potato chips. Each person received an unmarked bag of chips. The experimental group received the Pringles that had the Olestra, and the control group just received regular Pringles. So the researchers collected reports of moviegoers of gastrointestinal problems. We did this in our laboratory. Procter & Gamble gave us the double blind, so you had some that was your control, regular Pringles, and half of them were Pringles with Olestra. We put an ad out in the paper. We will pay you to come and eat potato chips and report, what's going on. And so labs all over the United States did this, and here's the results. So here's our hypothesis. Olestra causes the cramps. Prediction, people who eat the potato chips will be more likely to get it. We had a control group that ate regular chips, the experimental group. When you do an experimental group, you only change one thing, so Olestra was added. And look at the results. 93 of 529 people got cramps with it. That's 17%. Now look at the ones who ate Olestra. 89 of 563, which is less, 15.8. So guess what? Percentages are about equal. People who eat potato chips made of Olestra are just as likely to get intestinal cramps as those who eat potato chips made without Olestra. So this made Procter & Gamble extremely happy that they could put these back out in the chips, remove the label. But Olestra at this point had such a bad reputation that they changed the name of it. They got a new copyright and they changed it to Olean. And so Olean potato chips now have less fat than other potato chips. So Olestra does not cause the cramps. In your book, there's a butterfly bird experiment they talk about. We're not going to get into that, but there's some things you need to know though, that as you do experiments, sampling error, the larger the number that you experiment with, the greater your results are going to be. So if we were to, with the Olestra potato chips, let's say we just brought 2 people in and had them eat the chips. Well, that doesn't tell us anything because one had it and one didn't. If you bring 4 in, it gives you a little bit more information. But when they did this all over the country, there was literally thousands upon thousands of people who took part in this test. And the numbers showed throughout the whole population, different parts of the United States, different cultures, different backgrounds, but Olestra did not cause it. So sampling error is if you use just a very small number. You can begin with a large sample, repeat the experiments, and get them more and more precise as you go. Probability is a measured chance that a particular outcome will occur. So here's Natalie, she's blindfolded. She has a jar of jelly beans. It has 120 green and 280 black. So there's more black jelly beans than there are green jelly beans in the jar. So 70% of them are black. The jar is hidden from her view, and she takes this one jelly bean out. They remove her blindfold, and she looks at the jelly bean. Now, what does she know about the jelly beans in the jar? Are they all green? They might be. They could very well be all green. Could they be all the colors of the rainbow? They could very well be. She just took one out, so there's only one color. So that small number tells you absolutely nothing. Still blindfolded, she picks out 50 jelly beans from the jar. She ends up taking 10 green and 40 black. Now, what does that tell her? Well, now, at this point, now that she's done 50, that there's probably only 2 colors in there, and that there's a lot more black than there are green. It's even, well above, this is over 80% here now. And so, the larger sample leads Namath to 1/5 of the jar's jelly beans, or 4/5 are black. So if that more closely is what the reality situation is. Now, if she had the time and the experiment, they could do every jelly bean jar and know precisely. But most of the time in testing, we can't do every single subject. When we test people for Olestra, you're not going to test every single person on the planet, so you just get a representation. But the larger the number, the better off you are. All right. And we're not going to worry about this. I'm not going to ask you this on the test. The scientific theory, a hypothesis that has withstood years of tests. It's never been proven false. It is consistent. We call that a theory. So we start with a hypothesis, and when the hypothesis is tested again and again and again, it forms a theory. Until finally we come up with what we call a law of nature. It is something that we realize is going to be true pretty much all the time. If I would get up on the top of the roof of the science building here and step off, what's going to happen to me? Am I going to be able to float in midair? No, of course. I'm going to come hurtling toward the earth and accelerating as I go, 9.8 meters per second. So there's a law there, the law of gravity. I cannot beat the law of gravity. A law of nature is something that has just been tested so many times that it's just assumed everywhere it is true. So what is science unable to address? It can't address questions like why. What's my purpose? Science cannot define is there something good and is there something evil. Science helps us communicate our experiments without bias, something of a universal language. But even science has a bias that, these worldviews. Typically in a class when I teach it, there's 2 main worldviews, and it's usually about 50-50. That some say that it's just all natural process, some say that there was an intelligent designer or God. And those are different worldviews. Science cannot answer those questions. What happens to us when we die? Why am I here? What is the meaning and purpose of my life? Is there good and evil? Science says we happen only by chance. There's no good or evil. This is what we define it to be. And when we die, that's it. There's nothing left. We are recycled back as nutrients into the soil, maybe, and we can pass those nutrients along. And those are the points to ponder. And that is the end of chapter 1. Yay, finally. And so the first test will be on chapters 1 through 4. So I will be posting chapters 2 and 3 on Monday, and then on Wednesday, chapter 4. So thanks for hanging in there. I know this was a long chapter, covered a lot of ground. Thanks for hanging in there, and keep studying so that we do well. So goodbye.